From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Kyle Peterson and Kim Strassel, talking about the Twitter censorship files and the reaction to them. Kyle, you mentioned the nudity point about Hunter Biden. Well, of course you can cover that up or make sure it's not spread all over the internet. Seems to me an easy call. But we're talking about they censored a newspaper article that basically had everything right about Hunter Biden and emails with implications in the middle of a presidential campaign about Hunter Biden's relations, business dealings with a foreign government, and potential implications of Joe Biden knowing about Hunter Biden's dealings with China and maybe being a beneficiary. How do you censor that for other than political purposes?
Well, I'm not defending the censorship of that. Jack Dorsey, Twitter's former CEO, has admitted that it was a mistake and apologized for it, I think. I think what they would say is that they were concerned about Russian interference. And so there was all this stuff surfacing, allegedly from Hunter Biden. I think one really blameworthy party here is these U.S. spies who put out really prominent people who put out a letter saying that this Hunter Biden stuff had all the signs of Russian spy tradecraft. And so I think what they would say in their defense is that they're relying on that. And obviously they were wrong because the New York Post has been vindicated and other news outlets have gone through and verified to the extent that it can be what was on that laptop. And there's been nothing that has surfaced to suggest that the provenance of the laptop that has been described, which is that Hunter Biden left it and abandoned it at this laptop repair shop, there's been no disputing that as far as I know. What I'm just trying to suggest is that it gets a little more complicated, especially when you're getting into the question of whether it's appropriate for politicians or prominent figures to be flagging things about them to Twitter that they think are violations of the Twitter rule.
Well, complicated or not, I take your point that, press secretary's job is to flag something like that. But Twitter's job is actually not to do their bidding and not to be intimidated to do their bidding. Now, Kim, I want you to elaborate a little bit on the 51 former spies who signed that public statement on October 19th, 2020, claiming that their view was that the Hunter emails published by the Post were probably a, quote, Russian information operation. This exercise was led by James Clapper and John Brennan, two former highly partisan Democratic intelligence officials. And it looks to me, when you look at documents from Twitter, that these former spooks' framing of the issue as potentially Russian information did give a kind of justification for Twitter, an excuse, if you will. I would say justification is probably too kind to Twitter, excuse to suggest that they could censor this. And the reason I say this is because James Baker makes an appearance here. James Baker, Deputy General Counsel of Twitter at the time, formerly James Comey's counsel at the FBI during the Russian collusion scheme of 2016. And he writes a document that comes out in the Twitter censorship file suggesting that, well, we don't know if the emails were hacked, but there's some evidence that they might have been hacked, so therefore we should proceed with caution. And of course, by caution, he means, well, let's not suggest that he meant let's be cautious in how we allow these to be disseminated.
Yeah. No, this is the Russian disinformation crew that has known all along that this is bogus. Yes, does Russia interfere in some things? Sure. But the whole Baker and Clapper and Brennan constituency had figured out 2 years prior to this in 2020. The power of this is certainly in the political realm because they were the folks that brought us the collusion narrative that so obsessed the nation for several years and hung a cloud over the Trump administration. So the Post comes out with this. Twitter comes out with its justification saying it's possibly hacked material. Twitter's getting enormous pushback on this because they know it's pretty bogus. The New York Post has a very credible story as to how they'd obtained this laptop. One more thing I would point out that if that wasn't enough, around this time, Hunter Biden's former business partner, a guy named Tony Bobulinski, came out and corroborated that these texts and emails were true because he had them on the other end. We wrote about it. So you had a firsthand witness confirming that what was on this laptop was real. And yet in walk all these former spies, 51 of them. They knew that what they were writing was bogus, but they knew that it would give Twitter the cover it needed to continue continue censoring this, as well as other social media groups. Remember that Facebook was also pushing it down so that not as many people could see it. And it also gave the media the excuse they need to write it all off and not cover the story. So, I mean, it's all a big cloud, but you see a lot of central figures appearing again and again with the same tired-old argument that the press just credibly swallows, even though we should have known far better by that point.
Very disturbing to me to have these former spies, many of them at the very highest levels of U.S. intelligence, telling the American public that, oh, well, this is all probably just Russian disinformation. It is a political foray, intervention into a campaign. Certainly they have the First Amendment right to do it. But the fact that intelligence officers didn't used to behave this way. They used to show some discretion because they have access to information and a certain authority that comes with their former position that is impossible for any of us to double check. We don't have security clearances. We can't look. We can't check. This is why when somebody like Adam Schiff, chairman of the Intelligence Committee, lies flat out about what he claims he knew about Russian disinformation, that this is an outrage. So I think this very much warrants investigation, and I hope it happens. Now, before we go, I want to talk about Donald Trump's response here, because Donald Trump issued a statement in which he said that in response to the news about the Twitter files, do you throw the presidential election results of 2020 out and declare the rightful winner, or do you have a new election? ? A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. So Donald Trump, once again, belly flops into all of this. And let's listen to a couple of responses, one by the new Democratic House Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, followed by Republican David Joyce on ABC's This Week.
I thought it was a strange statement, but the Republicans are going to have to work out their issues with the former president and decide whether they're going to break from him and return to some semblance of reasonableness, or continue to lean into the extremism, not just of Trump, but of Trumpism.
Suspending the Constitution.
Suspending the Constitution is an extraordinary step, but we're used to extraordinary statements being made by the former president.
Whoever the Republicans end up pick, I'll fall in behind, because that's...
Even if it's Donald Trump and he's called for suspending the Constitution?
Well, again, I think it's going to be a big field. I don't think Donald Trump's going to clear out the field like he did in 16.
But that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you, if he's the nominee, will you support him?
I will support whoever the Republican nominee is. And I just don't think that at this point he'll be able to get there, because I think there's a lot of other good quality candidates out there.
It's a remarkable statement. You'd support a candidate who's come out for suspending the Constitution?
Well, you know, he says a lot of things. You have to take him in context. And right now, I have to worry about making sure as a Republican governance group and a Republican majority that we make things work for American people. And I can't be really chasing every one of these crazy statements that come out from any of these candidates.
Kyle, you can see there that the statement by the president allowing George Stephanopoulos to change the subject, talk about Trump and his statement to suspend the Constitution, which of course you can't do, short of a coup d'etat, which even for Mar-a-Lago he can't stage. Even when he was in the White House, he wouldn't have been able to stage. So he gives the media a chance to say, okay, let's make this the story and ignore the Twitter censorship and the FBI's role in that.
And I think that's what he wants. I mean, he is running for president, and he seems to be losing his grip after the poor showing of some of his candidates in the recent elections. He seems to be losing his grip on the Republican Party. And so what does he want to do? He wants to stay in the news, on top of the news. We've had a long history of this now, of President Trump making some sort of outlandish statement that makes the headlines the next morning and gets everybody riled up and leads to basically nothing, as this will. I would bet that even President Trump knows there's no way to terminate the rules in the Constitution. The other thing that just strikes me about this is he's talking about how this proves that it was a massive and widespread fraud and deception, fraudulent elections. And it doesn't matter. I mean, he says that no matter what the arguments are. First, it's the Dominion voting machines, then it's the mail ballots, and now we're getting into, social media censorship somehow means a fraudulent election. Media bias means a fraudulent election. I don't think that that is what a fraudulent election is. I mean, every Republican presidential candidate in my lifetime has faced media bias, and some of them have won and some of them have lost, and none of them except Donald Trump have claimed that that is the basis for saying that the election was stolen.
Kim, you have any thoughts on the president's belly flop into this?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's classic Donald Trump. But, I think he's doing himself great harm. And by the way, among the people that he needs. Look, he's running for president again. And what has been remarkable to me since the moment he made the decision to get back in is how tepid a lot of Republicans have been about that. And this is a different go-round than the first time. People didn't really know what they were getting with Donald Trump. There was a lot of pushback, obviously. He ended up consolidating the party. That's not going to happen as easily this time. And so when the president makes these statements, he might think that, he's rallying his base, but he is making the folks in Washington a lot more willing to break with him because they're very concerned about the level of stability there. And I think that this redounds to the benefit of some of the other Republicans who are thinking about making a run, and it only encourages them all the more that there's an opening there.
All right. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Kyle. And thank you all for listening. And don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. Of course, we're here every day on Potomac Watch, so thanks for listening, and we hope you're with us tomorrow on the rest of the